The hum was the first sign, a ghost in the machine of the cosmos that only Dr. Eris Thorne could hear. It wasn't a sound in the conventional sense, not something that vibrated the delicate bones of his inner ear, but rather a resonance that tickled the edges of his consciousness, a phantom signal hiding beneath the sterile hiss of deep space static. For 13 years, Eris had lived a life of devout solitude at the Atacama Large Array, his world defined by the silent ballet of 66 radio telescopes that turned their faces to the heavens like a congregation of steel disciples. He had traded the chaotic symphony of human interaction for the pure, clean music of the spheres, a music he translated into data, into elegant equations that describe the birth and death of stars. But this was different. This was a note he didn't recognize, a subtle, pervasive harmony that seemed to emanate not from a single point in the sky, but from everywhere at once, as if the very fabric of space-time had begun to sing. He first logged it as an anomaly, a potential calibration error in the array's sensitive receivers, a ghost born of Earth's own noisy magnetosphere. He spent a week running diagnostics, recalibrating, rebooting, chasing the phantom through miles of fiber optic cable and petabytes of data. But the hum remained, steadfast and serene. It was a perfect, impossibly complex waveform, layered with harmonics that defied any known astrophysical phenomenon. It was too structured for a quasar, too consistent for a magnetar, too widespread for a galactic core. It was, to put it in the simple, terrifying terms that his scientific mind fought to reject, a signal, and it was getting stronger. While Eris was losing himself in the cold logic of spectral analysis, the world outside his mountain sanctuary was beginning to twitch. In Mumbai, a 7-year-old girl named Priya, playing in the suffocating humidity of a crowded chawl, grew frustrated with her scattered building blocks and wished, with the pure, unadulterated focus of a child, that they would just come to her, and they did, rising from the dusty floor in a clumsy, wobbling vortex to settle in a neat pile at her feet. Her mother screamed, a sound of terror and awe that was lost in the city's cacophony. In London, a cynical currency trader named Julian, staring at the frantic dance of numbers on his screen, felt a sudden, crippling wave of vertigo and saw, for a sliver of a second, not the current market data, but the data as it would be in 3 hours, a vision of a catastrophic, system-wide crash. Acting on an instinct he couldn't name, he liquidated his firm's position, an act that would earn him a reputation for either genius or insanity by the end of the day. In a collapsed mine in Chile, not 200 miles from where Eris Thorne was staring at his screens, a rescue worker named Mateo reached into the rubble to check the pulse of a trapped miner, a man with a chest crushed beyond hope, and felt a strange warmth flood his hands, a warmth that flowed from him into the dying man. And as he pulled his hand back, he heard the impossible sound of a man taking a ragged, painful breath, when by all rights he should have been silent. These were the first tremors of the great unraveling, isolated ripples in the vast ocean of humanity, easily dismissed as miracles, hoaxes, or tricks of a stressed-out mind. The news cycle, ever hungry, picked up a few of the more sensational stories, branding them as viral curiosities, before moving on to the next political scandal or celebrity meltdown. No one saw the pattern, no one but Eris, who, in his glass-walled control room, surrounded by the barren, moon-like landscape of the high desert, began to cross-reference the timing of his anomalous signal with the eruption of these impossible events. The correlation was perfect, 1-to-1 match that made the hair on his arm stand up. The hum from the cosmos was not just a signal, it was a catalyst. It was a key turning a lock in the very core of human existence. Far from the sterile quiet of the Atacama, Sergeant Jia Lin of the UN Peacekeeping Force was trying not to die. The sun beat down on the dusty, makeshift checkpoint, turning the air into a shimmering mirage. The tension was a physical thing, a coppery taste in her mouth, as she faced down a militia leader whose eyes held the flat, dead certainty of a true believer. Her life was a study in control of her breath, her heart rate, her weapon, her fear. She was a creature of discipline and training, every action a product of thousands of hours of repetition. When the explosion came, it was not from the militia, but from a hidden IED, a coward's weapon. She saw the flash from the corner of her eye, felt the world rupture in a wave of heat and force, and her training screamed at her to drop, to find cover, but her body did something else entirely. In the microsecond between cause and effect, as the shrapnel began its hungry journey toward her and her squad, a thought, clear and sharp as breaking glass, pierced her mind. No. The word was not a plea, but a command. A shimmering field of aquamarine light erupted from her skin, expanding into a perfect dome that encased her and the 3 soldiers closest to her. The wave of fire and metal washed over them, impacting the shield with a deafening and percussive roar that sounded like the world's largest drum being struck once. The shield held. Shrapnel, warped and twisted, clattered harmlessly to the ground. The force of the blast dissipated around their bubble of impossible safety. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light vanished. Gia stood panting in the sudden, ringing silence, the smell of ozone sharp in her nostrils, staring at the crater where the road had been. Her squad stared back at her, their faces a mask of disbelief and terror. She looked at her own hands, half expecting them to be glowing, but they were just her hands, trembling slightly, slick with sweat. The control she had built her life around was gone, shattered by an act she could not comprehend, an instinct that had saved their lives but had also marked her as something other, something terrifying and new. Back in the desert, Eris found the source, or rather, he pinpointed the alignment. A trio of ancient pulsars, cosmic lighthouses spinning in the abyss, had entered a once-in-a-million-year conjunction. Their combined magnetic fields and rotational energies were weaving a fantastically complex interference pattern of radiation, a wave that was bathing the entire solar system. It wasn't the energy of the wave that was significant. It was its structure, its informational density. It was like a complex password being broadcast across the void, and for some reason, human beings were the receivers. He felt a tremor of academic excitement mixed with a profound sense of dread. He was an astronomer, a man who dealt in the tangible physics of the universe. This strayed into the realm of biology, of metaphysics, of something for which he had no training and no framework. He had to tell someone. But who? Who would believe that a cosmic alignment was causing spontaneous telekinesis and pyrotechnics? He would be laughed out of the scientific community. His career ending not with a bang, but with the quiet closing of a door to a padded room. He decided to start small, to reach out under a pseudonym on encrypted forums, searching for others who might be experiencing these things, looking for a community in the digital wilderness. It was there he first heard the term being whispered, the Whisper Collective. They weren't a formal group, just a scattered network of minds that had suddenly, inexplicably, found themselves connected. Artists who could paint visions from a stranger's dream a continent away. Musicians who could hear the emotional state of a city and turn it into a symphony. A schizophrenic whose voices were now coherent, shared conversations with a dozen other people. They were the nascent telepaths. their minds thrown open by the pulsar's song, their shared consciousness a chaotic, beautiful, terrifying storm of thoughts, emotions, and sensations. It was through them that Eris began to grasp the true scale of what was happening. It wasn't just a few dozen isolated incidents, it was thousands, growing exponentially every day. A silent, secret pandemic of awakening. In a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a place so quiet and isolated from the city's roar that it might as well have been on the moon, the entity known to the world as Alistair Finch felt the change. Finch was not a man, though the vessel he wore was a masterpiece of biological engineering, indistinguishable from the species he had so carefully curated for 60,000 years. He was a caretaker, the last of his kind, a living archive and warden bound by an ancient, solemn vow. He felt the pulsar radiation not as a hum or a wave, but as a solvent, an acid that was beginning to dissolve the microscopic cages he and his creators had so painstakingly built around the very essence of humanity. He sat in a chair carved from Martian meteor iron, and with a thought, he accessed the global information network, not through a computer, but by directly interfacing with the flow of data. His consciousness dipped into financial markets, surveillance systems, communication hubs, sifting through the noise for the signals of emergence. He found the girl in Mumbai, the trader in London, the healer in Chile. He felt the chaotic, unformed gestalt of the Whisper Collective, a nascent mind he would have to smother in its cradle, and he found the digital signature of a lonely astronomer in Atacama, asking questions that were far too dangerous. For millennia, his work had been simple observation, subtle manipulation, the occasional surgical removal of an anomaly, a rare genetic throwback who might exhibit a flicker of the old potential. He had guided their religions, pruned their philosophies, and nudged their technological development down safe, predictable paths, all to keep the lid on the terrifying volcano of their true nature. He did not hate them. In his long, lonely existence, he had even grown fond of their chaotic art, their irrational bursts of empathy, their fleeting, beautiful lives. He was a zookeeper for a species of sleeping gods, a zookeeper who knew, with chilling certainty, what would happen if they ever woke up. The pulsar alignment had forced his hand. The time for subtlety was over. He dispatched his assets, quiet, unassuming agents and sophisticated biodrones that moved through the world like ghosts. A social services agency in Mumbai received an anonymous tip about an abused child, and Priya was taken into the care of a private, well-funded institution from which she would never emerge. Julian, the traitor, was killed in a tragic, random mugging, his prescient knowledge dying with him. The rescue worker, Matteo, vanished during a subsequent mission, presumed lost in an aftershock. These were clean, precise excisions, meant to quell the spread. But it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. For everyone he contained, 100 more sparked into existence. The hum was getting louder for everyone. The caretaker, Alistair Finch, felt something he hadn't experienced in millennia: the cold, creeping tendrils of fear. He knew the prophecy of his people, the final warning of the human faction that had helped build the cage. They spoke of a convergence, a critical mass of awakened minds that could trigger a chain reaction, a species-wide reignition. That was a future he could not, would not, allow to happen, for the sake of the galaxy, for the memory of the billions who had died in the last human ascendancy. He would have to escalate his methods, and a profound sadness settled over his ancient consciousness. The sorrow of a gardener who knows he must burn his beautiful and poisoned orchard to the ground. The message that reached Jia Lin came not over a secure military channel, but as a whisper in the back of her mind, a soft, insistent voice that knew her name. She was in a debriefing, being questioned by stone-faced officers about the impossible incident at the checkpoint. They didn't believe her, of course. They believed it was a new type of enemy weapon, a directed energy field, and they wanted to know how the enemy had acquired it. They saw her as either a liar or a hysteric. The whisper, a voice from the nascent collective, told her to walk away, to leave everything behind, that she was in danger. For the first time in her life, Gia disobeyed a direct order. She stood up in the middle of the interrogation, walked out of the tent, and didn't stop. Her training made her a ghost. She slipped through the perimeter of the base, acquired civilian clothes, and vanished into the teeming chaos of the nearby city, guided by the strange, new compass in her head. The collective led her on a winding path across continents, a frantic pilgrimage toward a destination she didn't know, a meeting with people she had never met. She traveled by cargo ship, by bus, by foot, living on the fringes, her senses preternaturally sharp. She could feel the emotional state of people around her, a constant, low-grade empathic hum that was exhausting. She learned, through trial and error, to control the kinetic field. She could create small, focused shields to stop a thrown rock or deflect a physical blow. She could also push, projecting bursts of concussive force that could knock a man off his feet or splinter a wooden door. She was becoming a weapon, and the soldier in her was terrified of this untamed power, while the survivor in her embraced it as the only thing keeping her alive. Her journey ended in the stark, beautiful emptiness of the Atacama Desert, at the foot of the mountain that housed the array. There, waiting for her, was a man with tired eyes and a mind that felt like a library of stars. Dr. Eris Thorne. He had been guided to her, just as she had been guided to him. They were two poles of a new world, science and action, thought and power. "You're the soldier," Eris said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "And you're the astronomer," Gia replied, her hand instinctively resting on the pistol hidden under her jacket. "The whispers said you had answers." "I have data," Eris corrected her, leading her inside the control facility. "The answers are complicated and terrifying." And it was there, surrounded by the silent, listening dishes, that they began to piece together the puzzle. Eris showed her the pulsar data, the waveform, the undeniable correlation with the global events. He showed her the communications from the Whisper Collective, a torrent of shared experiences that painted a picture of a species in the violent throes of transformation. They were joined, over the next few weeks, by others drawn to Eris's beacon of understanding, a young man who could persuade anyone of anything, his voice weaving a subtle hypnotic web, a woman who could see the immediate past of any object she touched, reluctant psychometrist haunted by the echoes of history, a teenage boy who could speak to machines, coaxing information from encrypted servers and making traffic lights turn green with a thought. They were the first true cell of the awakened, a mismatched family of nascent gods hiding in plain sight. It was Eris, driven by an insatiable need to understand the how of their new reality, who proposed the next fateful step. "This ability isn't magic," he argued, his hands sketching frantic diagrams on a whiteboard. "It's physics. It's biology. The pulsar wave isn't creating it. It's unlocking it, which means the lock must be somewhere in our own bodies, in our DNA." He looked at Gia, his eyes alight with a dangerous fire. "I need a blood sample. I need to sequence your genome. I need to see what's different about you now." The idea was repellent to Gia, a violation of her physical self, but she saw the logic in it. To fight an enemy, You must first understand the battlefield. And the battlefield was now their own bodies. She agreed. Eris, using the facility's advanced medical and computing equipment, began the arduous process of mapping Gia's DNA, specifically focusing on the vast, mysterious regions that geneticists had dismissively labeled junk DNA. As the sequencer hummed and the data streamed onto his monitors, Eris prepared to look into the heart of the human mystery. He had no idea that what he was about to find would not be an answer, but a memory, an ancestral ghost that would rewrite the entire history of their species and confront them with a truth far more terrible than any alien invasion. The first dive into Gia's sequenced genome was like plunging into a lightless ocean. Eris, using his own burgeoning datapathy to navigate the torrential stream of information, felt his way through the familiar structures of the double helix, the elegant four-letter code that wrote the story of life. He saw the genes for her black hair, her brown eyes, her predisposition for discipline and order. But then he pushed past the known territories into the great unmapped wilderness of the 98% of the genome with no apparent function, the junk DNA. It was here that he felt something stir. It wasn't code in the biological sense. It was something else, something ancient and dormant, laid out in repeating patterns of such staggering complexity that they looked less like biology and more like a compressed data file. As he focused his unique consciousness on these structures, a jolt, like a psychic feedback loop, threw him back from the data. His nose began to bleed. The room spun. But he had seen something, a flicker of an image, a fragment of a thought that was not his own. He pushed again, harder this time, bracing himself for the impact. This time, the ocean of data parted, and he fell through. He was no longer in his lab. He was standing on a bridge of crystalline light, and before him stretched a city that defied geometry, its spires piercing clouds of amethyst and gold. The sky was a tapestry of twin suns and swirling nebulae. He was not in his own body. He was looking through the eyes of another, a being of immense height and power, and he could feel a thrumming, resonant energy coursing through his limbs, a power that made Gia's kinetic shield feel like a child's toy. He raised a hand, and at his silent command, a fleet of silver ships, each the size of a mountain, moved in perfect and silent formation across the star-dusted sky. The being whose memory he inhabited felt a surge of pride, of arrogance, of absolute, unquestionable authority. This was the ascendancy. This was humanity in its prime. Then the vision shifted. The sky was no longer serene. It was on fire. The crystalline city was shattered, its beautiful spires broken in bleeding light. The silver ships were warring with each other, tearing reality apart with weapons that unmade matter and bent space. He felt a searing, soul-shattering rage, a hatred for the other humans, the traitors who had challenged their faction's vision for the galaxy, a vision of absolute order enforced by psychic might. He felt himself unleash a wave of pure telekinetic force, a silent scream of power that tore a rival ship in half, and he felt the psychic death cries of the 10 million souls aboard. The horror of the act, the sheer scale of the fratricide, was so overwhelming that it shattered the connection. Eris was thrown back into his own body, collapsing to the floor of the lab, gasping for air, the phantom screams of the dead still ringing in his mind. Gia and the others rushed to his side. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. Eris could only shake his head, tears streaming down his face. "Not rulers," he whispered, his voice trembling. "We weren't rulers. We were monsters." The truth, when he could finally articulate it, fell like a shroud over the small group of awakened. The story was written in their very genes, a suppressed history of a species so powerful, so psychically potent, that it had nearly consumed the galaxy in a self-destructive civil war. The so-called junk DNA was a battlefield. It contained the ruins of their former abilities, but also the weapon that had been used to stop them, a sophisticated, genetically engineered retrovirus. This virus hadn't been deployed by an alien enemy. The genetic memory was clear on that point. It had been created by a coalition of alien species. Yes, but at the desperate request of the last surviving faction of humans, a group of scientists and philosophers who had looked upon what their species had become and chosen surrender and oblivion over victory. They had built the cage themselves, in collaboration with the races their brethren had nearly annihilated. They had sealed their own descendants on a forgotten world, their powers locked away by this dampener virus, and had set guardians in place to watch over them, to ensure they would never again threaten the universe. There was no oppressive galactic confederation coming to enslave them. The enemy wasn't external. The enemy was them. It was their own potential, their own history, and Alistair Finch. The caretaker wasn't a conqueror. He was a warden with a very, very good reason to keep the prisoners locked up. This revelation changed everything. Their fight was not a simple rebellion for freedom. It was a profound moral crisis. Did they have the right to awaken humanity, to unleash this terrible, beautiful power on a universe that was still healing from the last time they had wielded it? Gia, the soldier, saw it in tactical terms. "We are not them," she said, her voice firm, trying to convince herself as much as the others. 50,000 years have passed. We've evolved. We've changed. But Eris, still shaken by the visceral memory of godlike power and genocidal rage, was not so sure. "Have we?" he countered, his voice quiet. "We still kill each other over imaginary lines on a map and different interpretations of old books. What do you think will happen when a man who hates his neighbor can level a city with a thought?" The debate raged for days, a philosophical firestorm in the heart of the desert. They were the keepers of the most dangerous secret in human history, a secret that questioned the very nature of their species. While they argued, the caretaker continued his work. His network of agents and drones grew more efficient. The whispers of strange events in the news began to die down. The forest fire was being contained. He had located Eris's facility, not through technology, but through the subtle psychic resonance of their awakened minds. A beacon in the quiet dark. He didn't send an army. That was not his way. He sent a single agent, a woman who had served him for 50 years, a human who believed she was part of a secret organization protecting the world from paranormal threats. She arrived not as a soldier, but as a lost hiker, dehydrated and confused. Their small group, their humanity and empathy not yet burned away by their power, took her in. Her name was Evelyn. She was kind, grateful, and utterly devoted to her cause. And in the pack she carried was a device that, when activated, would release a targeted neurotoxin, tasteless and odorless, that would kill them all painlessly in their sleep. The caretaker did not relish the act, but it was necessary. The risk of what this group knew, of what they could become, was too great. The fate of the galaxy rested on a simple act of quiet, efficient murder. The night Evelyn the agent was to complete her mission, the hum of the cosmos grew louder. The pulsar alignment was reaching its peak, a crescendo that sent a fresh wave of resonant energy washing over the Earth. Inside the Atacama facility, the awakened felt it as a pressure behind their eyes, a tingling in their nerves. The young man with the power of persuasion found he could not only influence people but could also soothe their anxieties, weave a blanket of calm over their troubled minds. The psychometrist, touching a piece of rock from the desert, didn't just see its recent past but felt the slow, geological time of the mountain itself, a vision that nearly overwhelmed her senses. Gia, meditating to control her own turbulent power, found she could extend her kinetic field, not just as a solid shield, but as a sensitive, permeable membrane, allowing her to feel the vibrations in the air, the footsteps of a desert fox 100 yards away. It was this enhanced sensitivity that saved them. As Evelyn moved silently through the darkened corridors towards the ventilation system to deploy the neurotoxin, Gia felt her, not as a physical presence, but as a node of deception and lethal intent, a sharp, discordant note in the quiet harmony of the bass. The kinetic shield erupted around Evelyn not as a blast, but as a gentle, immovable cage of light, trapping her instantly. The surprise on the old woman's face was absolute. They disarmed her, finding the device and a data chip containing her mission logs and communications with her enigmatic superior. Control. There was no talk of aliens or wardens, only of containing bioterrors and protecting humanity from a dangerous contagion. It was a masterclass in manipulation. The caretaker's human agents were true believers, fighting for the survival of their species, never knowing they were the instruments of its suppression. Looking at the terrified, defiant face of Evelyn, a woman who had been about to murder them for what she believed was the greater good, the group's moral dilemma became terrifyingly real. Alistair Finch was not some distant, monstrous villain. He was here, among them, using their own people against them, leveraging their own capacity for fear and devotion. Eris, using the teenage technopath to bypass the heavy encryption on Evelyn's data chip, finally came face to face with his adversary. There, in the decoded files, were decades of surveillance, of containment operations, of a shadow war they never knew was being fought. And there was a profile of one Alistair Finch, a reclusive billionaire, a philanthropist, a major funder of projects related to genetic research and social stability. His corporate tendrils reached into every aspect of society, from media to medicine to government. He wasn't just a warden, he was the zookeeper who had designed and built the entire zoo. But it was the last file, a personal log from Finch himself, that stopped Eris's heart. It was not a battle plan, but a lament. Finch described the beauty of a human symphony, the elegant sorrow of a poem, the selfless courage he had witnessed in their fleeting lives. He wrote of his deep, abiding affection for the species he was forced to cage. They do not remember the fire they once wielded, the translated text read, and it is my sacred, terrible duty to ensure they never do. If they knew what they were, they would either prostrate themselves in shame or embrace the monster of their past. Neither outcome is acceptable. The quarantine must hold, for their sake and for all others. He was not their enemy. He was their protector, and he was their jailer. And now, he knew they had survived. He knew they had his agent. He knew they had read his files. The time for quiet excisions was over. The caretaker would now have to move to his final contingency, a plan he had prayed for 60,000 years he would never have to use. The plan was codenamed Lullaby. It was not a weapon of mass destruction. It was a weapon of mass salvation. From his perspective, it was a globally distributed aerosol agent, delivered through the same atmospheric processors that regulated weather patterns, a system Finch's own corporations had helped build. Once activated, it would disseminate a new, more potent version of the dampener virus. This version didn't just suppress psionic potential, It was designed to sever the neural pathways responsible for higher-order creativity, for abstract thought, for rebellion, for ambition. It would leave humanity placid, content, and forever incapable of reaching for the stars or the fire of their own souls. They would be happy, safe, and utterly neutered, a species of peaceful livestock, their volcanic potential extinguished forever. It was, in the caretaker's weary mind, an act of mercy, a final gentle lullaby for a race of sleeping gods who were having a nightmare. The discovery of Operation Lullaby transformed the group's abstract, philosophical debate into a frantic race against time. The caretaker's final solution was not a distant threat. It was a button waiting to be pushed. They had no army, no political power, no way to fight a trillionaire philanthropist who controlled the very air they breathed. All they had were their strange, new abilities and the terrifying knowledge of what humanity could become, for good or for ill. "We can't let him do this," Gia said, her voice hard as steel. The debate was over. The choice to live as placid slaves was not a choice at all. Whatever the risks, whatever the sins of their ancestors, they had to be free to make their own mistakes, to forge their own destiny. "But we can't become the monsters Finch is so afraid of," Eris countered, his mind racing. "If we just fight him with power, we prove him right. We can't win by force. We have to win by choice." The idea began to form, a desperate, impossible strategy born from their unique combination of talents. They couldn't stop the physical distribution of the lullaby agent. But the agent was just a vector for a virus, and the virus was just a key that turned a genetic lock. What if they could broadcast a different key, a counter signal, not a wave of radiation like the pulsars, but a psychic broadcast, a message sent from mind to mind, from awakened to unawakened? The Whisper Collective was the key, until now. Their network had been chaotic, a cacophony of shared thought. But the young man with the power of persuasion, whose name was Elias, realized his ability was not just about control, but about harmony. He could act as a psychic tuning fork, helping the disparate minds of the collective resonate at the same frequency, turning their chaotic noise into a coherent chorus. The plan was twofold. First, they needed to amplify this chorus to make it powerful enough to reach every human mind on the planet. For that, they needed a psychic amplifier. Eris, his mind still reeling from the ancestral memories, remembered seeing something in his vision, ancient human structures, vast crystalline arrays that were used to focus and project psionic energy across interstellar distances. He didn't know how to build one, but the design, the fundamental principles, were now burned into his memory. The raw materials they needed were quartz, rare earth metals, and a power source. Their teenage technopath, Ben, pointed out that the Atacama Large Array itself was a potential power source and a parabolic dish that could, with significant and highly dangerous modifications, be turned into a broadcasting antenna. The second part of the plan was the message itself. What would they broadcast? What could they say in a single global instant that could convince a species on the brink of awakening to choose peace over power, creation over destruction? This task fell to Gia and the psychometrist, a woman named Lena. Gia, the soldier, would craft the part of the message about control, discipline, the responsibility that comes with strength. Lena, who had spent her life haunted by the violent emotional echoes of the past, would provide the counterpoint, a message of empathy, of connection, of the need to heal the galaxy's ancient wounds, not reopen them. It was a desperate gamble, a song of hope they intended to sing into a hurricane. While they worked, turning the scientific marvel of the array into a strange, metaphysical weapon, The caretaker prepared to make his move. He knew they were planning something. He could feel the growing coherence of the Whisper Collective, a psychic hum that was becoming a clear, resonant tone. He accelerated his timeline. Atmospheric processors around the globe began the final, silent phase of loading the lullaby agent. He felt a profound sense of tragedy. He was about to lobotomize the species he had come to love, to save them from themselves. He saw it as the ultimate act of paternal love, a painful but necessary surgery on the soul of humanity. The final confrontation would not be a battle of ships and energy beams. It would be a battle of ideas, a war for the future of human consciousness, fought in the silent, invisible realm of the mind, with the fate of billions hanging on a single and broadcast note. The day of the convergence arrived not with a storm, but with an unnatural stillness. The sky was a crisp, cloudless blue. From his penthouse, Alistair Finch gave the final authorization. All across the world, invisible and odorless, the lullaby agent began its slow, silent dispersal into the atmosphere. He monitored the biosignatures, the atmospheric saturation, the projected timeline. Within 12 hours, HFY, the agent would reach critical mass in the global population. The great unraveling would be over. The human species would be gently, irrevocably put to sleep. In the Atacama, the repurposed radio telescope looked like a pagan idol, its massive dish now laced with a crystalline matrix that shimmered in the harsh sunlight. It was powered directly from the region's geothermal grid, a connection Ben the Technopath had jury-rigged in a terrifyingly short amount of time. The entire facility hummed with a dangerous amount of energy. Eris stood at the control console, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. His data pathy was their guidance system, the only way to focus the immense psychic energy they were about to unleash. Gia stood beside him, her posture rigid, her mind a fortress of calm and discipline. Lena was nearby, her eyes closed, her hands resting on a piece of ancient petrified wood, grounding herself in the deep time of the earth. Elias, the harmonizer, was at the center of it all, connected to a neural interface Eris had cobbled together. He was the conductor of an invisible orchestra, his mind the bridge to the Whisper Collective, which now numbered in the tens of thousands, a global network of sensitive minds, all waiting for his signal. "He's started," Eris said, his voice barely a whisper. "I can feel the agent in the data streams. The chemical markers are everywhere." Gia nodded once. "Then so do we. Elias, are you ready?" Elias opened his eyes. They seemed to hold a galaxy of other souls. "We are ready," he said, his voice a composite of 1,000 voices speaking as one. "Begin." Eris threw the switch. Power surged into the crystalline matrix. The air around the great dish began to vibrate, to ionize, crackling with a pale blue light. The hum that Eris had once heard in the silence of space was now a physical, deafening roar. Elias closed his eyes and began to broadcast. He did not send words. He sent a feeling, a frequency of pure, focused harmony that calmed the chaotic minds of the collective, uniting them into a single, powerful psychic entity. Then, through that channel, came the message. From Gia, it was a concept of a shield, not a weapon, of strength as a foundation for peace, of control born not of fear, but of understanding. It was the unwavering discipline of a soldier transformed into a vow to protect, not to conquer. From Lena, it was a wave of profound, aching empathy, the memory of the pain their ancestors had caused, the sorrow of a broken galaxy, the desperate, yearning need for connection, for forgiveness, for a future where power was used to heal, not to wound. From Eris, it was knowledge, the truth of their past, unvarnished and terrible, the scientific reality of their abilities, the warning of their potential for self-destruction, and the fragile, beautiful complexity of the universe they now had a duty to preserve. And from all of them, woven together by Elias, was a single, simple concept choice. You are awakening. You are powerful. You are terrified. But you are not your ancestors. You have a choice. This was their countersignal, their psychic antibody. It shot from the dish in Atacama, a silent, invisible beam of pure consciousness that struck the Earth's ionosphere and refracted, blanketing the globe in an instant. All over the world, humanity felt it. For every single man, woman, and child, the world stopped for a fraction of a second. The lullaby agent was already in their systems, the key turning in the lock to shut them down. But this new signal arrived at the exact same moment, a second key sliding into the same lock, offering a different path. A street vendor in Cairo decided to be consumed by a wave of placid contentment. Instead felt a sudden, overwhelming empathy for the tourist he was trying to swindle. A soldier in a war-torn country, about to pull a trigger, suddenly saw not an enemy, but a mirror of his own fear and pain, and lowered his weapon. A scientist on the verge of a breakthrough, a mother soothing a crying child, a prisoner in a lonely cell, all of them were touched by the message, the knowledge, the choice. The awakening was no longer a sporadic, chaotic series of events. It was a single, global, simultaneous moment of transformation. Billions of minds, all at once, were confronted with the dormant fire within them. The results were not uniform, were overwhelmed and fell into catatonia. Whose hearts were already full of hate, while their new abilities as a means to achieve their violent ends. And in cities across the world, localized bursts of destructive power erupted, but they were the minority. The vast majority, touched by the message of hope and responsibility, felt not a lust for power, but a profound sense of awe and a sudden, crushing awareness of their connection to everyone and everything else. In his penthouse, the caretaker screamed. It was not a sound of pain, but of failure. He felt the psychic wave wash over the planet, a tsunami of consciousness that shattered his carefully constructed quarantine. He felt billions of lights ignite where before there had been only darkness. His lullaby had failed. His long watch was over. He looked out the window at the city, a city that was now home to millions of nascent gods. And for the first time in his long, long life, he did not know what would happen next. The Atacama facility was a wreck. The power surge had blown out every system. The great dish was a slagged, smoking ruin. Iris, Gia, and the others were collapsed on the floor, drained and utterly spent, the psychic effort having taken them to the very brink of death. But they were alive, and outside, the world was being reborn in a fire of its own making. The story of humanity was not over. In fact, after 60,000 years of sleep, it was just beginning. The future was a terrifying, beautiful, uncertain dawn, and they, the first few to awaken, now had the awesome and terrible responsibility of helping their species take its first steps into a much larger universe, praying they had made the right choice, that this time humanity would choose not to be monsters, but to finally become what they had always had the potential to be truly, wonderfully, and terrifyingly human. The aftermath was chaos, a beautiful, terrifying symphony of a species grappling with divinity. The world did not end in fire, nor did it ascend into an immediate utopia. It trembled, caught in the throes of a violent planet-wide metamorphosis. In the first few hours, governments collapsed as leaders and soldiers alike were overwhelmed by their own awakening or the psychic fallout from their citizens. Financial systems, built on the illusion of confident prediction, evaporated as a million fledgling precognitives saw a million different futures. The old structures, the scaffolding of human civilization, simply dissolved, unable to bear the weight of this new reality. What emerged from the rubble was not anarchy, but a new, organic form of order. The telepathic network of the Whisper Collective, no longer a secret society, became the de facto global communication system, a constant, flowing river of consciousness that connected communities and allowed for unprecedented levels of collaboration. People with kinetic abilities, like Gia's, became the new builders and protectors, raising shelters from wreckage and defending nascent communities from those who had succumbed to the darker aspects of their power. Healers, their abilities now fully unlocked, rendered hospitals obsolete, closing wounds and curing diseases with the touch of a hand. Eris and his team, exhausted but resolute, became teachers. From their ruined desert sanctuary, they broadcast what they knew, not as a psychic command, but as open-source knowledge, the science of their abilities, the history of their ancestors, the ethical framework they had so desperately forged. They were no longer leaders of a resistance, but reluctant philosophers for a newborn race. Gia found her purpose not in fighting, but in training. She established enclaves where newly awakened individuals could learn control, not just of their powers, but of their emotions. She taught a form of psychic martial arts, a discipline of the mind and spirit, grounding her students in the principles of defense and responsibility that had guided her own journey. She was helping to forge the conscience of this new humanity. And what of the caretaker? Alistair Finch did not flee. He remained in his silent penthouse, a lonely king in a fallen kingdom, observing the chaotic rebirth of the species he had tried to save from itself. He was no longer a warden, but a witness. One day, a month after the convergence, Gia, Eris, and Lena came to see him. They did not come as conquerors. They walked through a city that was both ruined and vibrantly alive, where people floated through the air to repair skyscrapers and gardens bloomed in an instant in public parks. They found him sitting in his chair, looking out at the changed world. "You failed," Gia said, her voice not accusatory, but factual. "Did I?" the caretaker replied, his voice ancient and weary. "Or did my work simply enter a new phase? I spent millennia trying to prevent the fire. Now, my role is to observe, to record, to see if you will burn the galaxy down again, or if you will finally learn to use your light to illuminate the darkness." He looked at Eris. "You saw what we were. You know the risk is not gone." "The risk will never be gone," Eris admitted. "That's what it means to be free. The difference is this time we know. We have the memory of our failure written in our very cells. We have a choice." The caretaker fell silent for a long time. Then, he made a decision. With a simple thought, he unlocked his personal archives, the complete, uncensored history of the galaxy, of the first human empire, the Civil War, and the Great Suppression. He sent it not just to them, but out into the global consciousness. A final, terrible gift of truth. "Your ancestors helped build this cage," he said. "They foresaw that this day might come. They left behind more than just warnings. They left tools, star charts, the fundamental principles of technologies you cannot yet imagine. They wanted you to have a chance to do it right. Should the quarantine ever fail, I will not help you, but I will no longer stand in your way. With that, his form seemed to shimmer, the masterfully crafted biological vessel dissolving into a being of pure, golden light. He had held a physical form to interact with them, but his true nature was something far older and stranger. The light condensed and then vanished, leaving the three of them alone in the empty penthouse. He had not died. He had simply left. His long watch was truly over. Humanity was now alone with its new power, its terrible history, and its uncertain future. In the years that followed, they did not burn the galaxy down. They stumbled. They made mistakes. There were conflicts, tragedies, and moments when they came perilously close to repeating the sins of their fathers. But the message of the convergence had taken root. The foundation of empathy and shared consciousness was too strong. They turned their gaze outward, not with the arrogance of conquerors, but with the humility of a species that had been given a second chance. They built ships that sailed on currents of thought, powered by the focused will of their crews. They reached out to the other races of the galaxy, the descendants of those who had helped to imprison them, and they came not with demands, but with an apology, an offering of peace, and a promise to be better. The story of the second human ascendancy was not one of empire, but of connection. They became explorers, artists, healers, and guardians. Their psychic abilities used to mend cosmic wounds, to nurture fledgling worlds, and to listen to the silent music of the spheres that Eris Thorn had been the first to hear. They never forgot the fire they wielded, but they chose to be keepers of the flame, not a consuming inferno. And somewhere, in the deep, silent spaces between the stars, an ancient being watched, and for the first time in an age, it felt a flicker of something it had long forgotten: hope. The hum of the universe was no longer a warning, but a song, and humanity, at long last, was finally learning to sing in harmony.